Hello everyone, welcome to Kalam's answer writing session for the day. So today I have picked up another static question for us to discuss. It can be also categorized as a semi-static question. If you look at the chain of events that have been happening in the past few months, you can see NRC, you can see NPR or National Population Register, and then you have a Citizenship Amendment Act, and also we have National Investigation Agency Act. And what is common about all these things is that there is some kind of imposition of a central law or a central scheme on the states. So in this context, this question has been asked to talk about an issue on federalism. Should states have some kind of empowerment, or should they be acting as administrative agencies of the center itself? So in this context, a question has been asked. That is the theme of the question is the federal structure and the balance on federal structure. I'll read out the question for y'all. But before I do that, as usual, I want to give out certain prerequisites in this particular question. Prerequisites for a hardcore polity-based question. The first prerequisite is the usage of article. If you look at federalism, there are several articles that you can mention between center-state relations. You have Article 256. You also have Article 356, which is related to President's rule. And then you also have Article 365. I want you all to Google what it is, and then I want you all to put it down in the comment section. And then there are several other articles in relation to center-state relations. And you could put this down in your article section of the prerequisites. In addition to this, there are several reports which are given, be it the second ARC reports or the Punchi Commission reports. They talked about different ways in which we can improve the situation or the connect between the center and states. Let's take an example. If you look at the way in which the center conducts itself in relation to our neighbors, be it Bangladesh or Myanmar, Pakistan, and so on, whenever we make a policy on river water disputes, we basically go forward and make the policy without taking into the account the interests of the state. Like, for example, why is West Bengal protesting on Teesta dispute? Why is West Bengal not keen on going forward with the Teesta River Water Treaty? This is because the center has not taken into account the interests of the state. So Punchi Commission in this context says, dear center, you have to take the bordering state into account when you make an agreement with the country in the neighborhood. If you're making an agreement with Bangladesh, you have to take into account the interests of West Bengal, because West Bengal has its interest involved in that treaty which you're negotiating between yourself and the Bangladesh. Like, it could be a water sharing treaty or so on. That is another prerequisite, mentioning these reports and their recommendations and so on. So these are the two basic prerequisites I want you all to keep in mind in order to address a question which is based on hardcore polity. Now we'll move forward and evolve the introduction, body, and conclusion format, which we usually do. And in order to do that, we have to read the question. I'll read out the question for you all. In the Indian polity, states cannot be reduced to mere administrative agencies entrusted with enforcing Parliament's laws without any application of mind. Critically analyze. So basically, the overall theme of the question is the following. The states have to be empowered. The states are not supposed to be mere addendums or mere administrative agencies of the center. They have to have their mind of their own, because that is basically what the constitution envisages. Why do we have this union and state list? That is because we want the states to perform themselves. We want the states to become self-sustaining entities in themselves. Okay, and if if center passes a law and this law overrides the interests of the state, this will reduce the state into a mere administrative agency. Like, for example, take the case of the National Investigation Agency Act. In this act, there are certain provisions which override the police in different states. But police is what? It is a state subject. So if the center is passing a law which brings some kind of power over the police, which is basically a state subject, then the center is basically encroaching upon the space of the state. That is not what is wanted. We want a doctrine of federal balance. We want a balance between center and states. We want a team spirit between center and states. And that is what the Niti Aayog talks about when it talks about the idea of Team India. So this is basically the crux of the question. And what are the subheadings that we evolve? The first subheading that we should evolve is the following. we have to first establish that the center is doing such things before we get into the analysis of analysis of how the center is not supposed to do so and so activities, of analysis of how the center is not supposed to encroach on the space of the states. First we have to establish that this is a process that is going on. And how do we do that? We come up with a subheading which says that the center is basically taking up certain actions which are encroaching upon the powers of the states. Like what? You have this EA Act, Citizenship Amendment Act, and its continuation, NRC, NPR, whatever it is. And then you also have National Investigation Agency Act. And then there are several conventions, international conventions, under Article 253, the center can negotiate any treaty, convention, covenant, and so on. And the state is bound to follow it. How can we ask the state to follow it mindlessly without basically justifying our stand? How can the center do it? So if the center is basically for coming up with an international convention, it has to basically first convince the state. And if it doesn't do it, the center is basically doing what? It is converting the state into a mere administrative agency. So we give out all these examples, recent acts, different articles, and so on to prove the point, to prove the fact that the states are being reduced to mere administrative agencies. Once we do that, we address the clear crux of the question, which says that the state should not be reduced to mere administrative agencies, because that is what has been asked in the question. And once I identify that, what do I do? Naturally, I have to balance out my answer by giving a way forward. Because if I tell the examiner that these are the things that the center is not supposed to do, because it will give rise to so and so consequences or ramifications and so on, so I am supposed to move forward and tell him what the state is supposed to do, tell him what the state as in the center is supposed to do. I also have to tell him that you have to follow the SR Bommai judgment, which calls for a federal balance. I also have to tell me that you have to repeal OFSPA, because it reduces states to non-entities, and so on. So these recommendations also I also have to give. So these are the subheadings. So in order to enrich my answer, what else can I do? How about putting a diagram? Putting a diagram in which we just mention the constitutional provisions. And once you write that down, you clearly tell the examiner that you know the constitutional provisions, you know your constitution and their respective articles. When you put in articles there, 256, 356 and 365, all these things, when they get put in the diagram, that becomes an value addition to a answer. So this is going to be the broad structure of your answer. And how do we introduce our answer? We could introduce our answer in the following way. One is to talk about the current affairs approach, in which the states are resisting the fact that the center is trying to impose on them. And in this context, we can discuss about following things, so on and so forth. That is one way. Secondly, you could talk about the idea of federation that has been envisaged by our constitution makers. You could talk about the idea of federation in which Bharat is a union of states. Ambedkar has passed on so and so comments, and India, as in the center, is supposed to protect this notion of federal balance. That is one way to introduce your answer. So we have discussed the basic structure of our answer, basic side headings, and the broad structure of our answer. Now we will move forward to see how this person has addressed the answer. So this person starts out by saying Indian constitution tries to establish a federal structure with more powers to the center. So this federal structure, in order to add weight in the introduction itself, he could have mentioned Article 1. Bharat is a union of states. There's no point in writing Bharat is union of states, but you could just mention Article 1. That is one way to introduce. This is a good introduction. Now look what he does. He basically is moving forward and trying to list the constitutional provisions. First is the concurrent list. What do you have in the concurrent list? There is a doctrine of federal supremacy in the concurrent list. What happens in that? If there is a central law and if there is a state law on the same subject, the central law prevails until and unless it has received the assent of the president, and so on. So there are certain nitty-gritties, but overall, if you look at the concurrent list, the center has basically prevails. So this is one way in which the constitution itself is subverting the position of the states. He is mentioning that. Next is moving on to Article 256. This is basically an executive related point. Like for example, I pass a law, I am the center, I pass a law, and the states have to follow it. If the states do not follow it, I can consider it as a case of constitutional breakdown and immediately invoke precedent's rule. So that is where Article 256 becomes relevant. And then he moved forward to talk about Article 253. which I just mentioned. The center can sign any convention, covenant, and so on. Like, for example, if I have to go forward and sign Ramsar Convention for wetlands, I don't have to take the permission of the states. I first sign the convention and then I ask the states to follow it. What if I sign a convention which is against the interest of the state? That is basically an issue, right? That is a glitch. That is a problem that we have to solve. But that is not there in the constitution. The constitution as it stands gives extra powers to center in negotiating international agreements and so on. So that is also has been mentioned. And then he gave me certain numbers, article 356, 365. So he beautifully listed down certain provisions in the constitution itself which are trying to subvert the position of the states, which are trying to make sure that the states become an administrative agency. Okay, so he is trying to warm up the body of the answer by loading his answer with the articles. Well, I must agree that there are too many articles written here. It might become too dense of an answer. You don't have to write too many articles, but then this is a content dense answer, and I will tell you that. Next, he moves forward and he gives me examples of states being reduced to mere administrative agencies. What are the examples he gives? First is the National Population Register, and then you have Citizenship Amendment Act, NRC, and so on. Citizenship Amendment Act is basically your law. Some of them are schemes. So he clubbed all these things. He's basically trying to tell us that the instructions of the center are converting the states into mere administrative agencies. The center is telling me to implement NRC. Why should I implement it? It is not in my interest. It does not help me. Why should I, being a state, should implement it? But then the center is doing it. So this is basically the center encroaching upon my space. In addition to this, imposition of Hindi, the center gives out certain legislations, there are constitutional provisions, and so on. There are several rules and regulations which the center gives, and it wants the states to follow. That is another kind of imposition. And in addition to this, he talked about National Investigation Agency Act, which gives overriding powers over the state police. So he is basically trying to give me examples to establish the fact that the center is trying to reduce the states to mere administrative agencies. But think about it, there are also several legislations in which the center takes into account the importance of states. Like, for example, you look at GST. GST is basically a phenomenal act in which the state has a good amount of role to play. You look at the composition of GST council. Two-thirds of the members are from states. So there are certain nice legislations also which balance center and states. But right now he's establishing the fact that the center is encroaching upon the space of the states. He has done it well. Now he has to move forward and talk about how this should not be the case. Let's see what his side heading is. He says, however, center should not be imposing. Center should not be imposing its laws and so on. And even if it does, it has to first take the consent of the states. Even if it is not taking the consent, it should at least put in some effort to convince the states, right? If you are not taking consent prima facie, at least finish off with your legislation and convince the states that this is in the benefit of the society, this is in the benefit of the nation as such. You are supposed to do these things. So let's move forward. What is the point? First, reducing states to mere administrative agencies converts us into a unitary state, which is not in the interest of our country, because India is basically a huge country. We have so which is it is a pluralist country. There are so many sects, there are so many religions, and so on. In order to absorb all these interests, we need a federal state. We need states which are more empowered. So if you convert the nation into a unitary state, it does not bode well for our democracy. Now look at the subheading. However, center should not be imposing. The points he is supposed to give here are the points which tell us why the center is not supposed to encroach. So the points here are supposed to tell us the consequences of imposing. He has already established the fact that the center is imposing. Now he is trying to tell us that there are certain bad consequences of imposing on the space of the states. What are these consequences? First is the tyranny of the center. That is the first point. And secondly, if the center keeps on imposing itself, keeps on passing these laws, expecting the states to follow them without asking questions, there will be center state conflict, and the states will directly go to the Supreme Court under Article 131. Article 131 gives jurisdiction to the Supreme Court to solve issues between states and states, between center and states, between center and state and other states, and so on. That is Article 131. And like, for example, you have Kerala was not happy with the imposition of NRC, so it directly filed a suit under the Supreme Court. So this is basically a situation of conflict. situation of friction between center and states. That is a bad ramification. Next, he is moving forward to tell us that there will be a breakdown of federal structure, like it happened in center between center and West Bengal. This is over Teesta issue. He should have mentioned Teesta issue here. And then he moves forward. He talks about the following thing. This is a conceptual point, and it is a nice point. He's talking about local bodies. If the center keeps on encroaching upon the areas of the states, why will states have any incentive to devolve their powers to local bodies? See, if the elders in your family are doing something bad, you won't तुम जाके सत्य हरिश्चंद्र नहीं बनोगे ना. You will also do the same thing to your kids, right? So if the center is not behaving properly with the states do not have that kind of motivation. The state does not have that kind of conviction to behave properly, to devolve powers to the local bodies. That is a bad consequence. So the federal balance basically breaks down. In addition to this, by imposing itself through laws on states, there is going to be a rise in what? Rise in regionalism, sub-regionalism. The states are going to coalesce into a region, or a particular state becomes strong in terms of its regional tendencies, and so on. And in the worst cases, it might lead to secessionism. Of course, that is an extreme point, but it is a possibility. You have to put it out there. Being a rational person, you have to first be cautious about the things that could happen, and it may or may not happen, but you should put it out there to show the examiner that it is a possibility. And then he has given me good points why the center is not supposed to do so and so things. He has told me clearly the bad consequences of center encroaching upon the areas of the state, of the center taking away the powers of the state. Now he moves forward and gives me few points. One is to follow the SR Bommai judgment. It basically tries to establish federal balance by saying that president rule can be imposed only in rarest of the rare circumstances. Maladministration is not breakdown of constitutional machinery, and you cannot put president's rule at your whims and caprices. That is one point. Next, you have to build Team India spirit, and he is doing that by telling me that there are certain legislations in which the center and states have come together, to cooperate. Like I just mentioned about GST Council Act. So he has given me 2 points here. Another point should have been better. 1 or 2 points extra on the way forward would have been better. But overall, he addressed all the parts of the question, and he has given me too many points. And I can see too many keywords and judgments. SR Bommai, Team India. I can see so many articles, right from 131 to 256 to 356 to 365 and so on. So this is a very much content loaded answer. So these are the kind of answers you will be able to write in the first half an hour to 1 hour of your paper. But it will be really difficult to reproduce this kind of quality in the last one. So don't be disheartened by looking at this answer if you find it too dense, if you find it too difficult to reproduce in your answer, because some people do it. If I've been studying this for about 5 or 6 years, I probably will be able to put down this article. So take the good parts from this article, take the structure from this article, and whatever additions you want to make, please do it. This is just an example to show you all that there are better things that can be done by you all. I am telling you all these points that have been written by someone in the team. If you think there are better points, please write them down, and write them down on the comment section so that people will take some output out of it, fill their notes, and it will be helpful for all of us. What is the conclusion? He says the center should restrain from imposing while simultaneously empowering states. So the center should tone down and the state should be empowered. That is the conclusion. It is more or less a generic conclusion. Overall, the answer is basically a content dense answer, but it has really good points. That's my review for the day. I'll meet you all tomorrow with another answer. Thank you for your time.